The following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools.
Students are raving about author Joan M. Wolfe's historical fiction novel, Runs with Courage.
And I really like how it's about an important time in history that nobody really knows about. It was really interesting.
I thought the book was amazing. It always keeps you turning the page, and there's a lot of twists.
Welcome to Meet the Author. I'm your host, Emily Godfrey, and joining me today is Joan M. Wolfe, a professional teacher who also happens to be a published author. We'll be talking about her historical fiction novel, Runs with Courage, which received the Jefferson Cup honor by the Virginia Library Association. This award recognizes distinguished biography, American history, or historical fiction books for young people. Joan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm excited to talk about your books.
Great to be here.
So before we begin, you are a teacher. Would you mind telling us what you teach and what grade levels?
Yes, right now I teach grades 1 through 5 technology. I'm a technology specialist, but I have taught everything from 2nd grade on up to 8th grade, and I've taught adults as well.
Do you have a favorite grade that you like to work with?
You know, it kind of depends. It's whatever grade I'm currently teaching. So right
Good
now,
answer.
My favorite is technology specialist.
Well, without giving too much away, can you tell us a little bit about Runs with Courage?
Yeah, Runs with Courage is about the residential boarding schools that were around in the 1800s and up through the early 1900s. Their purpose was to take Native American children and make them more Caucasian so that they could go out into the world and become Caucasian children.
Well, what inspired you to write this story?
Well, I grew up in the Black Hills of South Dakota. It was a sacred ground for the Lakota people. I've loved the Black Hills. I knew a little bit about the Native American history, but not much until I was researching for a gold rush story that takes place in Deadwood in 1875, and discovered that the whole community of Deadwood was actually an illegal settlement because the Black Hills had been promised to the Lakota people in an earlier treaty.
Oh, wow.
And then when the gold rush came and all of the people came, our government just kind of forgot about the treaty and let the people come. So then I realized, it's like, oh, there is an interesting story there, and did more research and discovered the residential boarding schools.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about who are the Lakota people?
Yeah, the Lakota people are one of the Plains Native American tribes. There are, I believe, 7 different tribes, and they are one of them.
Why was this story important to tell?
Well, I think this story shows one part of our government's attempt to really destroy the culture of Native Americans and force them to assimilate and just get rid of their culture. And I think that's an important story to tell. Their first answer to doing that was to get rid of the buffalo. And they would encourage people to hunt buffalo. And the buffalo, the thing is that the way the settlers would hunt them is they would hunt them, and then all they wanted was the heads, the horns, the coats. They would leave the meat and everything just to rot. And then the second step that was taken was the reservation system. And the thing about the Lakota people is it was very much a system of giving to have. And if they had something, they shared it with the whole Tiospe. And Tiospe are the small family groups of the whole tribe. So the tribe is like the big group, and then Tiospe are the small family units that would live together. So when one person would have something, they would share it with others, and then that's how they would get things back. But the reservation system really changed their economy to one of getting to have, and no longer kind of that sharing thing. It was rations, it was being forced onto squares of land. Hunting was a huge part of the Lakota culture. I mean, that was their lifeblood. You know, they hunted. Once they were on the reservations, there really wasn't much to hunt. There was some game, but not much. They were given cattle like rations, but the cattle were dead. They'd already been killed because, again, that was something that was part of our culture. Was you don't hunt the cows, you just eat the dead ones. Unfortunately, sometimes the cows were killed and then they were just left before they were shipped, and so the meat was rotted, and that would poison people and kill them. And then, kind of the next step of that was, well, we need to teach the children how to be more like, how to become part of our culture. And so the way that you do that is you just eradicate the culture. And Colonel Pratt was one of the first boarding schools. He started one of the first boarding schools in Pennsylvania, the Carlisle School, and his motto was "Kill the Indian, save the man." And so they would do things, when the kids came, they would cut their hair super short. And for Native Americans...
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book several times, how that was like traumatic.
Yeah, and Native Americans, different tribes have different beliefs, but Lakota, their hair would be long unless they were in mourning. They'd never cut it. But that was the first thing they would do, is they would cut the kids' hair and dress them in clothing that they weren't used to. They weren't used to anything. It was a completely different kind of culture. And I think that just, I didn't realize, I guess, the extent that our government went to really eradicate culture.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the lessons that the students would learn in school? Or like the types of curriculum, maybe?
Yeah, well, and in the 1800s, and that's really the area that I know more about. I don't know much about the boarding schools as much in the 1950s. But it was, there was not the separation of church and state. And so, God was very important, and that was a big part of the boarding schools. The other thing is that a number of the boarding schools were run by Christian missionaries, and so it was all about the white God, or just God. And again, for Lakota people, they have a sense and had a sense of spirit is in everything. And there's spirit in trees, there's spirit in animals. There isn't necessarily like one God that's separate from everything else. God is in everything. And so I think it was very confusing for the children. And then for Wynn's, in my book, she's confused because of the crucifixion of Christ. And, it was such a different way of looking at things. And there was no integration. It was, our way is right and your way is wrong. And if you don't believe our way, then we're going to beat you, and we're going to, make sure that you submit to what we think is correct, what we think is right.
And there was no easing into that. Like in the story, Four Winds, it's like, you're there now, this is starting. There was no introduction.
Exactly.
At Colin Powell Elementary School, students are reading Joan's book, Runs with Courage. Let's check it out.
I really loved the book Runs with Courage because I really admired how Four Winds was able to have the courage to run back to her tiospe. But not only that, what I admired even more was that she found the courage again to go back to where the whites were teaching her, to get to know them and to try and be able to teach her tribe the ways of the whites too.
Four Winds, the main character, was really brave and strong, that she could go through all these things that happened in the book and still hold on to her personality.
I really like how William pretended to be slow around the whites so he could keep his culture close to him when he was in the shed. I thought that was really smart.
I thought the book was amazing. It always keeps you turning the page, and there's a lot of twists. there's a really good plot with lots of interesting characters, and I thought Four Winds is like very brave and courageous.
I really like how it's about an important time in history that nobody really knows about. It was really interesting.
We are back with author Joan M. Wolfe. In the story, Four Winds sees things with fresh eyes almost, like she kind of is experiencing things for the first time, a lot of things that we take for granted. Was that hard to write about?
Very hard, because again, it's that authenticity, and I'm writing about something that I didn't experience, and I want it to be an authentic, situation, and so I did the research as best I could. I also had two women vet my story. One is a Lakota woman who teaches Native American studies in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and another woman, her husband, who unfortunately passed away, but he was Dakota, and so her children and grandchildren are Dakota, and she just knows so much about that culture. And so they both read my book for authenticity and found a few things, and it's like, oh yeah, sorry, there's, to help me make sure that it was culturally accurate.
Why is cultural identity so important?
Well, I think that cultural identity it's a collection of our stories that make us who we are. And so it's so important to be able to maintain those stories because it tells who we are as unique individuals and unique cultures.
And what happens when it's lost or erased?
We lose our stories.
I think that many students will find Four Winds to be a really inspiring character, and they'll have a lot to relate to her with. Can you tell me more about how you wrote her, like what you were inspired you to create this character?
Well, I was inspired by just learning about the children who had been through these schools and learning some of their stories. And many of the children really fought to maintain their cultural identity. And so I began to kind of see and hear a child and the experiences that she would have had. And then part of it is just good writing and trying to show a character, trying to help the reader experience things as if they were the character experiencing it for him or herself.
It sounds like you had to do a lot of research for this book, and that sometimes can be very difficult, especially for our students. Can you talk a little bit about your research process and where you found this information or these personal stories of children?
Yes. My research actually began with, I connected with a woman who is Lakota, and she was managing a Native American bookstore at the time. And so I was talking to her about Native Americans and about this story, and she began by referencing me, sent me in the direction of a bunch of wonderful, wonderful books that she would highly recommend about the Lakota people in general, and then about the residential boarding school as well. So that's where I started. And then I glommed onto anything that I could get a hold of, but I wanted to make sure that my sources were authentic Lakota. I watched documentaries, I went to several museums. Online, there's a number of different collections. There's the Memory Collection, there's the Library of Congress Collection. The Native Americans and Lakota, they don't have a written history. It's all oral and pictorial. So
that's interesting.
So there wasn't a lot of, there is not a lot of written histories, but there's a lot of picture histories and a lot of that sort of thing. So I did as much as I could to find those.
And did you speak with any prominent figures that gave you personal stories and narratives, or?
No, the prominent figures were more from different books that I read and different accounts in that way.
How did you begin to organize yourself to do this research? It sounds like there were lots and lots of sources to comb through.
Yeah, it's really hard. And the thing about historical fiction is I think that the author has a unique responsibility to making sure that the history is accurate, because when people, even, doesn't matter if it's kids or adults, when they read historical fiction, they kind of forget the fiction part and focus on the history. And so to organize, I just start by just kind of reading everything I can, taking notes, and then I organize my notes into different aspects of the culture, decide where I'm going to start with the story. Sometimes that is where I end up starting. Sometimes the start ends up being more the middle or the end of the story, and just kind of go from there.
I know that with my students, they are often really inspired to learn more about the true events when they read a historical fiction novel. So I think it is really important to be accurate and have true information, because you don't want to start off with a false belief of something.
Yeah. Particularly, I think, when you're writing about a cultural story, and this is definitely a cultural story.
Do you model the research process with your students, and is it similar to the way that you did your own research?
Well, it's interesting because I have taught writing and I have taught reading. I haven't taught those for a number of years now because I'm teaching technology. But when I taught kids writing, absolutely. And I would research right along with them and talk about, well, when I do this and that sort of thing, so that they could see how I was doing things. I would bring I still do actually bring my manuscripts in so kids can see them, and I whine to them about the writing process. It's like, yeah, I don't want to hear how hard it is to write 2 pages because I have to write 50. But yeah, definitely.
Let's find out what our MTA crew learned on a recent visit to Colin Powell Elementary School.
So the students were given the assignment to read Runs with Courage, and after they finished the book, they worked in groups, 6 groups of 5. The assignment was to think about the book and come up with a creative way to report it back to the class. So each of the 6 groups developed something entirely different, from digital to paper to posters.
After reading the book Runs with Courage, we decided to make a flipbook. The first page is when Four Winds gets taken away from her tribe to the white boarding school. After reading the book Runs with Courage, we decided to make a chronological order model of the main events in the book. In this section, you will see Runs with Courage, eating lunch with her friends, walks tall, and moon awake. I took a small bite and discovered it tasted a little sweet. It tasted so good, I hungrily gobbled the entire piece. Page 30. Our group just finished reading Runs with Courage and thought it sounded a lot like a movie. And every great movie has an even better trailer. So we decided to make our own trailer.
My name is Four Winds, and this is my story. They took me away from my family. They burned what I had left from them. They changed me into someone I didn't recognize.
For our project, we decided to make like a 3-dimensional poster.
In the second scene, Runs with Courage is going down to the office to get some sewing supplies, but then she sees a sign that says, "Kill the Indian, save the man," which is on page 81. With confusion and anger, she breaks the sign, and that gets her in a ton of trouble.
For the past couple of weeks, our group has been working on a movie trailer poster about this awesome book, Runs with Courage. We really enjoyed reading it, and we know you will too. Here's our thoughts about the book.
This is the cover of the book, and what we think is that the mountains Four Winds is facing is the obstacle she had to go through.
So we decided to rate this book. We rated it PG because there's some complex words that little kids won't understand. Also, we rated it 5 stars because it was so fabulous. We enjoyed it so much, and we want everyone to read this book. Now selling in bookstores near you.
We are back with author Joan M. Wolfe. So writers approach their work in many different ways. As a teacher, is your writing process similar or different than your students?
Well, it's a little bit of both. And I think for kids, they don't have the luxury of the time that I have. I'm able to start something and then just keep going with it, whereas kids have deadlines and they have a week to get finished or that sort of thing. One thing that I have done with kids when I taught 4th grade, and I think it was really important, I had the kids create a rough draft, and do as much as they could on it, and then set it aside for a couple of weeks, and then we went back to it.
That's nice, because it gives them time to reflect and think about it.
And a fresh eye. You know, it's hard for anybody to revise, especially for kids. I think it's really hard to revise. But if you've had a chance to step away from it and then you come back to it, it's like, oh yeah, you know, that wasn't the best, and yeah, I could change that, and that whole thing.
Do you have a favorite part of the writing process, or better, like a least favorite part of the writing process to share?
You know, I think every process is hard. I really do. And like right now I'm in the middle of trying to write my next novel. And so I'm in that very beginning stage, trying to kind of find the story. And it's so hard. And it's like, okay, it's okay though, because it'll get better. You know, the next stage, the revision stage will be better. And then I get to the revision stage and it's like, oh, this is so hard. It's just so hard. Why am I a writer? And I think, oh, but it'll be better when I get to the next stage. So they're all different. They all have challenges. I kind of like them all for different reasons. There's not really one that's my favorite versus another one.
And Runs with Courage was not your first published book for young people. Can you tell us a little bit about your first novel, Someone Named Eva?
Yes, Someone Named Eva is also a historical fiction book, and it actually takes place during World War II. It's inspired by a true event that took place in Ligica, Czechoslovakia. And it's actually about the Lebensborn program, which was a program that Himmler, one of Hitler's men, started. And the purpose of that program was to take children who weren't German, but they had the Aryan characteristics, and put them into a school and train them to be German, and then send them off to be good German citizens. There are some parallels between the two stories.
Well, is historical fiction your favorite genre?
You know, I kind of fell into writing it. That's all that I've been writing. Growing up, I preferred to read fantasy, so I never thought I would become a historical fiction writer. But yeah, right now it's my favorite. Yep.
Do you have any plans to write any fantasy novels anytime soon?
Kind of. I started one, and my agent said it was terrible.
Oh no!
So it's aside for right now. But at some point, yeah, I'd like to go back to that for sure. Yeah.
When teachers model the writing process, they often use published authors. Do you have a favorite author that you like to use as a mentor text in the classroom?
I have a lot of favorite authors. I don't use one author specifically. It's more just a collection of books. One thing I'm really fascinated about with writers is those who have the ability to take characters and really show transformation and change. And so like The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Avi kind of shows that change. And I love Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy by Gary Schmidt. And that also shows some change with one of the characters who's really kind of a jerk in the beginning. And then by the end, you really are rooting for this character. And The Book Thief is for older kids and adults. But again, it's like there's a character in there that you start off going, oh, I really don't like this character. And then by the end, you're like, yeah. And then for littler kids, Click Clack Moo, Doreen Cronin, she has been writing books for younger kids, The Trouble with Chickens and Chicken Trouble, and I can't remember all of them.
Yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Oh my gosh, they're so awesome. They're funny, and I have all of those as my own personal mentor texts that I look at when I'm writing to see how to do different techniques and things.
So if practice makes perfect, do you write every day?
I do. Sometimes it's just little bits and times. When you're a teacher, it's the energy, that is really, I don't always have a lot of energy. But yes, every day, sitting down and writing something.
Do you have a space that you dedicate to do your work?
I do. I have a loft, and it's wonderful. It's my writing spot.
So what are you working on currently?
I am working on another historical fiction novel, of course. And it's a girl for a character, but it has nothing to do with schools, this one. So, and it's 14th century France.
Oh, wow. Can you tell us any more or no?
That's about it. Yeah.
We'll have to wait.
Doesn't even have a title yet. So
how do you encourage the use of active voice versus passive voice with your students when they write?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And sometimes I still kind of struggle with that myself. But it's more just having the students write from the character's perspective and not what's happening to the character, but how the character is experiencing it.
I think you mentioned that earlier, like you like to show what's happening to a character and how they change and not tell.
Exactly. It's that old adage, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. Yep.
Do you think that texting and email and Twitter have changed the way language is used and developed with kids?
Absolutely it has. Absolutely it has. And, you know, I've been thinking about that, and especially since I'm a technology specialist. And I, you know, there are people who feel like it's the, you know, the evil of the world and it's ruined everything. And I don't know that it's ruined it, but it has definitely changed it. And I think it's made things shorter and in smaller bites. But I still see great books being published that are beautiful and long and elegant in their texts and in their sentences and that sort of thing. So I guess it's changed. I'm just not sure if it's a positive or negative at this point.
Well, it's almost like learning another language, right? So it's like you have your texting and your social media language, and then the one that you want to use at other times as well.
And it's almost like we talk about code switching.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like that. It's like, okay, texting is fine in this situation, but now in this situation, we're not going to write a story or an essay using texting. Yeah.
So what do you think is the key to good writing instruction?
Well, one thing, and I don't know that teachers will be thrilled to hear me say this, but I think it's important that teachers write themselves, and not necessarily that they have to publish or they have to go, you know, through everything, but to do what they're asking kids to do really helps them understand, I think, a little bit more about the process and a little bit more about what kids are going through. I used to teach an adult class, a graduate class, and it was teachers as writers, writers as teachers. And I would make them do exactly what we make kids do. And it was so fascinating to see these teachers that, you know, they're the masters of their classroom and they're very confident in their assignments and everything. And they would get just as frightened and scared and insecure when they were working on their own writing as the kids do. So I think that that's important. It's really important.
And how do you encourage students to write who have challenges with language?
That's a tough one. And again, I was working with an adult writer who was from a Middle Eastern country, and she was really struggling with trying to write. She said, you know, in my culture, we have 20 different words that mean cool. And in this culture, like, cool means cool. So what words do I choose? And what I did with her was she would do a mix of writing in her home language and writing in English, and then worked to kind of transform it into English so that English speakers could read it. And I think with little kids that are struggling with language, letting them write in their home language can help. And then also them speaking it out loud to somebody so that you do the writing. Because I think for language, it becomes as much as about mechanics, more than like the thought process kind of thing. You don't want that to stop the thought process.
Well, we are almost out of time, but before we go, do you have any last-minute advice for our aspiring writers?
I would say read a lot, and read everything, like things you like and things you don't like, and then write a lot, write every day.
Joan, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
To learn more about Joan M. Wolf, visit her website. If you'd like to learn more about our upcoming programs, visit us on the web. For the Fairfax Network, I'm Emily Godfrey. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep dreaming.